If we could talk about the long line of emperors that made up the Roman Empire, how were they selected?
Oh boy, this is we've been talking about Augustus's great achievements and how clever he was with propaganda and all. This is his great failure.
Yeah.
So his great failure is that he did not solve was the problem of succession. How do you ensure that the next person who follows you is not just the best person, but is qualified? And he fails to do it. So the principle he settles on is heredity. So the nearest blood relative.
Mhm.
And he goes through all these people, all these young kids in his family die. He keeps trying to make the heir. And he ends up making his heir Tiberius, who he never liked. It was his stepson. He didn't like him, but he ends up inheriting it. And the next set of emperors, the Julio-Claudians, which is the family that Augustus starts, they all basically are who is the nearest male relative to the previous emperor. And that's how we get a lot of crazy emperors like Caligula or Nero. And then the next family, the Flavians, the first guy is kind of an Augustus. It's Vespasian, the one who builds the Flavian amphitheater. And then one of his sons takes over Titus, who's okay. And then the next son takes over Domitian, who's nuts again. So heredity just isn't working.
Yeah.
And Rome fights a couple civil wars. And in 98 AD, we're 100 years now into the empire. And they look back at this track record and say, okay, we've been picking our emperors by heredity, and we've gotten some real duds here, some real problematic people. Is there a way to fix this? And this is one of the few instances where the Romans, who I keep saying are very traditional and resist change, I think actually make a change and realize we got to do something different. And so the next guy looks around and says, okay, forget who's my nearest male relative. Who's the best qualified to be emperor after me? I'll pick that person and then I'll adopt him as my son. So they kind of stick with the heredity, but now it's this fake adoption. And you end up with a lot of old guys adopting middle-aged adults as their son, which is a little strange, but it works. And so for the next 80 years, you have only 5 emperors, and they're often called the 5 good emperors. They're not related necessarily by blood. They sort of pick the best qualified guy, and they're all sound, competent, good emperors. And the 2nd century AD from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius is often regarded as the high point of the Roman Empire. And a lot of that comes from you have political stability. You have a succession of decent guys being emperor who rule relatively wisely, promote good policies. There's other things working to Rome's advantage, but that's good. And then where it falls apart is where the last guy, Marcus Aurelius, looks around and says, who's the best qualified guy to succeed me? What a coincidence. It's my own dear son, who turns out to be a psycho. And then it all goes downhill.
And some people place the sort of the collapse of the Roman Empire there at the end of Marcus Aurelius' rule.
Yeah, so 180 AD is one common date for an early date for the end of the Roman Empire because from then on, it's a mixed bag of good and bad emperors.
At the very least, this period is when the Roman Empire is at its height on all different kinds of perspectives.
Certainly geographically, I mean, at this point stretches from Britain to Mesopotamia, from Egypt up to Germany. Like I said, probably about 50 million people within its boundaries. Within those boundaries, there's relative peace. So, I mean, sometimes people talk about the Pax Romana. I mean, the Romans are fighting lots of people, but within the boundaries, you have relative peace. There's relative economic prosperity. I mean, nothing in the ancient world is that prosperous. It's just a different sort of economy, but it's pretty stable. There's no huge disasters happening yet. Some plagues start in Marcus Aurelius's reign. But yeah, this is pretty much seen as the high point of the Roman Empire, and I think it is. I think that there's truth to that.
Let me ask the ridiculously oversimplified question, but who do you think is the greatest Roman emperor? Or maybe your top 3.
Emperor? I tell you what, I'll tell you my favorite Roman who wasn't an emperor, and that's Marcus Agrippa, who was Augustus's right-hand man. So Agrippa's this interesting guy who is extremely talented. He's a terrific general. He's a terrific admiral. He's a great builder. He, is kind of like the troubleshooter for Augustus. He's the guy who wins the Battle of Actium for Augustus. So literally, Augustus would not have become the first emperor without Agrippa. When Augustus rebuilds the city of Rome, it's Agrippa that he gives the job to. Agrippa rebuilds the Campus Martius. He builds the first version of the Pantheon. He personally goes through the sewers to clean them out. And he just has this great set of qualities that he's very self-effacing. Mm-hmm. I think he likes power. He wants real power, but he realizes I don't have that kind of clever politician's ability to be the front guy. So I'll just serve my friend Augustus loyally. They were childhood friends. I'll win the battles for Augustus, and I'll let him take all the credit. But I'll be his number 2 guy. And that's what I'm good at. And he realizes his limitations. I mean, so many people don't. So many people are like, oh, I just want to keep, grabbing for more and more and more when it's not something they're good at. And I think Agrippa says, I'm good to this point and I'll play that role and no more. And that'll give me a lot of power, but I'm not going to press it. And he's just very hardworking. He's modest. He's self-effacing. He's highly competent.
I wonder how many people in history there are that are like the drivers, the COO of the whole operation that we don't really think about or don't talk about enough, to where sort of they're really the mastermind.
Or the ones who make something possible. I mean, even in this conversation today, you would not have Alexander the Great without his father, Philip II, having built that army and handed it to him on a silver platter. Octavian would never have become emperor without Agrippa. So they play central roles sometimes. But if I had to pick an emperor, I'd probably pick Augustus just because of his influence. And because I admire his the thing Agrippa didn't have, his political savvy, his manipulation of image and propaganda, all that I find very fascinating. Though I'm not sure he's a great human being, but he's a really interesting figure.
Whether he's good or bad, he was extremely influential on defining just the entirety of human history that followed. Yeah. Probably one of the most influential humans ever. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, if you ask in public who the most famous Roman emperor is, would that be Marcus Aurelius potentially?
I don't know.
But he's up question. There, right?
He's real famous because he was a Stoic philosopher and he wrote this book, The Meditations.
I mean, it's just interesting. Stoicism had, as a philosophical ideology, had a role to play during that time. I mean, there's the tragic fact that did Nero murder Seneca?
Yes. Well, he drove him to suicide, let's say. There's
a lot of interesting questions there. But one is like the role, especially when it's hereditary, the role of the mentor, like who advises who with Aristotle and Alexander the Great, like that dance of who influences and guides the person as they become and gain power is really interesting.
Well, I mean, one of the big questions with the Roman emperors, and we've been talking about some of them, is why did so many seem to be either crazy or just kind of sadists? And that's, I don't know that there's a good answer to that. I mean, people have theories, Caligula got a brain fever and changed after that or something. But I think there's a lot of maybe truth in the notion that the ones who seem to go craziest quite often are the ones who become emperor at a young age. Mm-hmm. And there is something about that old cliche that absolute power corrupts absolutely, especially if your own personality isn't really fully formed yet. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think take anybody when they're a teenager. If you all of a sudden said, you have unlimited power, what would that do to you? How would that warp your personality? I mean, look at all what do they always have to say, like the Disney stars who sort of go wrong or something because they get rich and famous at this very young age.
Yeah, fame, power, and even money. If you get way too much of it at a young age.
Yeah.
I think we're egotistical, narcissistic, all that kind of stuff as babies. And then when we clash with the world and we figure out the morality of the world, how to interact with others, that other people suffer in all kinds of ways, understand like the cruelty, the beauty of the world, the fact that other people suffer in different ways, the fact that other people are also human and have different perspectives, all of that, in order to develop that, you shouldn't be blocked off from the world, which power and money and fame can do.
And conversely, a lot of the emperors we regard as, quote, good emperors are the ones who become emperor at a, middle-aged or something, where their personalities are fully formed, where they're not going to really become different people. And so that works in that theory too. I mean, I don't think it's absolute. And of course, the greatest exception is Octavian Augustus, who, starts his rise to power as a teenager, but somehow doesn't seem to go nuts.
Yeah, history has
It's
a lot
not
of
an absolute, but it doesn't help to get that much power at a young age, I think.
What does it take to be a successful emperor, would you say?
So you say, well, what does it take to be a good Roman emperor? If you were going to draw up, a job description, seeking Roman emperor, what are the qualities and qualifications you would put on it? Obviously, you would put, responsible, good understanding of military, economics, whatever, ability to delegate. But just to be fun, let's consider how much does it matter whether the emperor is good or bad? Because in the ancient world, what does it affect, really, if you're, say, a peasant in Spain, if the emperor is crazy Nero or good Vespasian? I mean, how does that affect your day-to-day life? How does it affect you if you're a peasant in Italy, which is the average inhabitant? I mean, the crazy emperors mostly affect the people within the sound of their voice. So yeah, they go crazy. They murder senators. They murder their members of their own family. They do wacky stuff. But a lot of that is constrained to the immediate surroundings around them. And meanwhile, the mechanism of the Roman Empire is just grinding along as it would anyway. I mean, the governors are running their provinces. Stuff's happening. I guess an emperor can start a war. He can maybe raise taxes. But that would be the ways that he's affecting the whole empire. And here we get into technology does matter. We're dealing with a world where, let's say you're in Rome and you're the emperor and you want to send a message to a province far away, let's say Judea. That message might take 1 or 2 months to get there and 1 or 2 months to get a reply. So how much influence as emperor are you really having over that province? I mean, those people pretty much have to make their own decisions and then kind of just say to you, this is what we did. I hope that's okay. Because otherwise nothing gets done if they're waiting 4 months for a decision.
Even in the realm of ideas, they can't get on TV and on the radio.
Yeah,
and
communication
and broadcast
is so slow and so uncertain in ways that today, with the ability to instantaneously talk to people across the world, we can't even imagine. And the Roman Empire is huge. I mean, it is months to send a message and get an answer. So here you have the emperor in Rome. Yeah, he affects who's around him. And he can affect even common people. I mean, there's crazy emperors who are at the games and they're bored and they say, well, take that whole section of the crowd and throw them to the lions or something. There you're being affected by the emperor. But if you're outside the range of his sight and voice, do you care who the emperor is?
So the big one,
most of the time.
That's a really important idea to sort of to remember. Same with U.S. president, frankly, in terms of the grand arc of history. Like, what is the actual impact? But I would say the big one is probably starting wars.
Yeah.
Major global wars, or ending them in both directions. And then taxation too, as you said.